But well, cool, man. Well, honestly, like the biggest part of this is like everyone's journey is so different. And that's normally how I kick these things off is just like, you came from, I don't know if you came from, but started in film a long time ago, maybe not too
Uh,
long ago, but started in film, ended up with, the league, the teams, now building your own thing from the ground up, just kind of take us through, what that journey's been like and how you got to where you are today.
yeah, yeah. So I studied film in college, and I had some internships in the film industry. Kind of thought that I wanted to get into marketing for movie studios and TV shows and that whole deal. But I ended up, one of my best friends in college, his sister actually worked at the NFL. So as I was looking for what my first job out of college would be, I would incessantly ask my friend to intro me to his sister, and finally got in touch with her. It was just an informational type of conversation of like, what's it like working at the NFL? What do you do? And she was very good at giving me just career advice more broadly. Obviously, I approached it more as that than just like, I want a job. But nurtured that kind of connection, and got a lot of good advice from her that would have helped in any scenario. But a gig ended up opening up like right as I was leaving college. It was a 7 month contract position with the NFL on the club digital team. So the team that supported all 32 clubs in digital and social strategy, which you know that team well. So she encouraged me to apply, and I was like, okay, definitely. And I hadn't necessarily, I had an internship in, I had some sports based internships in college. So really, I was focused on just working for a company or a brand that I thought was cool, which I think a lot of people out of college probably have that mindset. And I was always a huge NFL fan, a huge sports fan in general. So yeah, I applied and got the gig, and kind of that started my career in digital and social, really, which wasn't necessarily a plan of mine to just say I want to get into digital media. Obviously, social at that point wasn't even really a career path yet; it was just getting started. So that was my first gig, and that kind of led to working for the league for a year, and then working for on the team side. I went to the 49ers for 2 years, and like really got into just digital content and social media content, and being like, I really loved the ability to be like creative in that role, but also strategic. And it was nice going from the league to a team, because at the league I wasn't necessarily like creating content or running any accounts. I was just working with the clubs, as you know, on their strategy and helping advise from a central standpoint. But I really wanted to get in the weeds of actually creating content, which I got to do at the 49ers. And it was super fun and very like engaging and rewarding to be on that side of things. So yeah, that's kind of how things started. And um, then I went back to the league for a stint on the international side, which was really fun, because that was not new, but a new level of investment the league was putting into international. I think I was one of the first like central marketing hires. So that was very much like full creativity, launch social media accounts in Germany and Brazil, like places that now are having games. So it was cool to be at the start of trying to launch social presences in other countries. And I don't know why they hired me. I mean, I don't speak any other languages, but no, it worked out well. And then yeah, so all told, I was at the league for almost a decade in different digital social marketing roles, and then left to start Slate. And my one of my co-founders actually was a video producer with me at the 49ers, so we had met way back when, both working at the Niners. So that was kind of funny that that came back around. I guess like 6 7 years later, we started a company together, which is cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's cool,
Yeah,
man. We're gonna get to Slate for sure because I want to know anything and everything you're willing to share.
yeah,
Um, but one of the things that like kind of it was my first real eye-opening experience was going from something that I knew so well. Like I never played football or anything, but that was like that's where I kind of blossomed and grew my career. Like I was in the NFL for 7 years.
yeah,
And so when I came to baseball, I was like, oh, well, it's content. Like it'll be fine. Like I played baseball. I know, I know the Pirates. Like This will be
Right.
good. And then it was like complete shell shock of just like there's you have affiliates and minor league teams, you have
Right.
like drafts at different times, you have
Yeah.
international signing periods, you have all these different things that it was like all the stuff I took for granted with the NFL that you just knew from the
Right.
back, like the back of your hand. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like it's probably not that sort of shell shock by any means, going from the league to clubs to the league, but
Mhm.
talk about maybe that transition of, how do you go from basically, like you said, supporting all 32 to then focused on one singular entity and then back to all 32 again?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. I would say from the first stint at the NFL was obviously very much working with the clubs. Like that was the role. It was to work with the clubs on their digital and social. So we were very much kind of in their world day to day, tracking what clubs were doing in terms of their content, tracking their analytics, trying to pull out trends, seeing who was doing it best, who wasn't, recommending the things that we knew worked, at across clubs to try to lift some of the clubs up who weren't doing certain things. So really got like a very uh, all-encompassing training on like what makes a good club digital and social team, because that was like the role, was to see all 32, compare, help everybody get better, and you really saw like what things worked and what things didn't. um, and also it was just almost like technical support on the old CMS, which I'm sure you have nightmares about, but like obviously got very familiar with the tools used to manage the website. And that at that time, websites were more important than social, and Facebook was just starting to be kind of a traffic driver. Um, but I actually didn't know I wanted to work for a club, or didn't have that in mind. I was trying to get hired full time at the NFL because I was on a contract basis, which ended up extending beyond the 7 months. But it was still just like, yeah, we don't have headcount, that whole deal. And my boss, George Scott, who you probably remember,
Yeah.
and Mike LaBianca, they like called me into their office one day. Like all the bosses were there, and I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like I'm about to get hired full time. And they were basically like, so Eric, like, what do you think about uh, going to Kansas City? I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? They were like, basically, the Chiefs had let their digital leader go, and had like a void in the role, and their like VP of marketing and content was basically went to George and was like, hey, can you send someone to help in the meantime while we find this permanent position? So yeah, they basically sent me. I think one, it was like flattering because maybe I was doing a job, but also because they knew nobody else on the team who had like established lives, like wanted to go to Kansas City for an undefined amount of time in the middle of like late winter, early spring.
Oh.
Uh, so I was like, yeah, I'll go. And I went to Kansas City and basically got dropped into the Chiefs. It was their first, it was the off season where they had the number one pick in the draft. So they just went like one and 15, but then Andy Reid was there and Alex Smith had just, so it was like kind of the start of this new era. And they had the number one pick in the draft. And when I got there, it was basically right around like schedule release and draft time, like leading into draft. But I ended up basically running all their digital and social as kind of like a one-man band. And I had learned a lot in the last like 8 months working for the NFL about like what it took to do that successfully. But yeah, I was like a year out of college, and I was like the person, literally the president of the Chiefs was like asking me for advice on like digital media. And I was like, this is crazy. But honestly, like things weren't going so well before that there was a lot of easy wins, right? So I was like making a lot of very positive changes in a short amount of time, and like working through stuff. And um, it was super rewarding to be like, all right, I'm gonna change the website. I'm gonna like work with the video team. Like we should create this content. I'm gonna like I was like posting all their social. and like the numbers started going up, and I was like, it's awesome to actually be the one doing this, versus just advising on it. So that like, and it felt good to have that level of just like control and autonomy. So it was a pretty crazy thing that happened early in my career to basically be like director of digital in a way at a club, less than a year out of college.
Right.
um, so that taught me a lot. And I mean, it didn't come without like stress. I was just like, I had to figure everything out. I was just like, okay, I'm here. I don't have a ton of guidance. Like, I guess I got to like run this website. So that's when I realized I definitely wanted to be more like hands on the keys. And yeah, the VP there actually ended up going to the Niners and asked if, I would want to come with and take a job at the Niners. So I'm from California, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely not going to like
Yeah.
live in Kansas City full time. Great place, loved my time there, but I wanted to stay in California. So it was a perfect fit. And then I went there and worked for Scott Kegley, who I think is going to be on this podcast as
Yep.
well, who became like a good friend and mentor of mine, and had a few great years there. And yeah, that's where I met Michael, so my co-founder. But this is a roundabout way of saying like the transition from the league to the club was like, oh, I actually have ownership here, and I could do things that are creative. And if I have an idea, I could execute on it, not just like recommend it. And I really liked that. So yeah, did that for a few years and then transitioned back to the league. And that transition was like, oh, I actually have work-life balance.
Yeah.
So then I went back to the league and was like, oh, this is great. Like, I don't have to work 6 days a week, 12-hour days.
Yep.
Uh, and yeah, that was its own kind of adventure. But that was like the big shift. And that was a kind of the best of both worlds, because I was still, there was still a lot to do on the international side. And it wasn't back on the old team I was at, just like recommending stuff. We were doing more hands-on, like, let's create content. We took Odell Beckham to Germany for a week and got to create a bunch of content around that. So I still got to like come up with ideas and execute on them, but it was a better balance of obviously not having the schedule around the team, which, as you know, is never ending,
Yeah.
especially in season. So yeah, that was kind of, it like led me to that, which was kind of the best balance of the two.
That's awesome, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's cool that like without even knowing like that first role in the NFL where you're basically scouting the 32 teams and what
Yeah.
they're doing, then you're like, okay, well, I get to run one. Like you basically had the playbook ready to go of like I know what every team is doing. This would be my take on it. And that was kind of like that was the hardest thing when I first because I was with a NASCAR track when I first started.
Mm.
Um, oddly enough, like was never a NASCAR fan, still not a NASCAR fan to this day, but it was like I basically accidentally got into the industry, but like coming to the Steelers, then it was like, okay, I'm not kind of on my own little island in Michigan trying to, make people care about a racetrack that only has two races a year. It's like I have to compete with 31 other clubs and then the rest of the sports world. So it was like that
Yeah.
learning curve was so steep at first where it was like, you're now it's like you can try stuff, but you have more of an educated guess. But like at
Yeah.
least in the role that you went into, it's like you almost had at least the general playbook that then you could kind of put your spin on.
Totally. Yeah. And then when I was, the Chiefs again were in such a bad way in that area before, and that's part of why they were like, hey, we need somebody, like anybody, So I really was like the expert there, because of what I had learned in just like 8 months, like in that more kind of oversight role, which I think was a great thing for my like career confidence too, of being like, okay, I could like own this, I could direct things, I could come up with ideas and measurements of success without like a boss telling me, hey, this is what you need to do. And I think that's basically served me well in my career, like ever since.